Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service, here today to present the full moon of June 24th, 2021. So we're going to look at this chart set for Washington, D.C. And though I am going to talk about the angles and the houses for Washington, D.C., I also would like to look at the Aries point at the very end so that we can see the world at large and how it's affected. With that said, I do want to point out that there is a difference between a new moon, which carries with it a lot of predictions about the future, but we're going to be looking at the full moon, which is more of a reflective time, a time for us to kind of look at what's going on around us and maybe take an evaluation of how that affects us internally and externally. In this particular chart, it'll be internal, but we'll get to that, particularly when I get to the Aries point. But for now, we're going to check out what it's like in Washington, D.C. in the Janus chart. But before I go to the Janus chart, I want to say thank you for watching this video. And thank you to all my subscribers, whether it be the website or this YouTube channel. Thank you all for allowing me into your lives. And thank you for helping to build this channel. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe, like, share, comment. I'd love to hear from you. So with that said, let's jump in and look at the Janus chart to start with. And I did start off with not just the planets, but also the trans-Neptunians. So let's go and see what we have. So we're back. And here we are. This is our chart. So we have, I want to say, kind of an interesting chart. It's pretty spread. You can see from the red and then the blue that we have a grand trine in this chart, but realize this would be Zeus. So when I speak about these points with this trine, realize that this trine will still be in fact regardless of where you live. So here we have on the DC chart, Zeus sits here. And so the grand trine from Mercury to Jupiter, okay, you see that. And then there's more so there's also Mercury to Saturn, and then Saturn back up. That's the one I was really looking for, is the grand trine. I wanted to find the one that was closed. So you see, that's a grand trine. Mercury, Saturn, and Zeus. That means that people can be very restrained, very contained. This is about control, or maintaining a form of control. And that, particularly when you think of Mercury, Saturn, that's about people being careful about their words and being careful about what it is they're portraying from that Mercury. Okay. Mercury is really strong where it is, and Saturn is very strong where it is. So that's a really incredible combination, even right there, that they're both very, very strong, and they are, which puts them at a better position, both of them. And they're rubbing elbows, if you will. That's a trine. So that's an easy energy. It's very easy between Saturn and Mercury right now. And the Zeus is that restraint. Zeus is our excitement about things, especially when we start something new. But we always have to, hold on a moment, we have a lot of sirens today. I'm back. I actually closed Windows. It has been so bad. I've been trying to do this video for a while, and I have been distracted, completely put off, and had to start over again because of sirens. So we won't have any now. I closed the windows. So here we are back at our trine. And think of, your restrictions, you're structured. But when you think about gathering information, with that trine to Saturn, the Gemini gathering information, that Saturn is going to be objective and it's organized. So it's going to be able to organize that information. So that's really cool, actually. So as I look at this, um, that grand trine is the first thing that stood out. But now we have a couple of T squares. We'll be talking about it, but I don't see a real grand cross. We have a lot of opposition here. Let's talk about some of this, okay? Chiron is an interesting player in this because 12 degrees, and 12 degrees. And then we have 13 degrees. So that's like golden triangle material. So when you have something, it doesn't matter what sign, but everything's in the same degree point. That's something you also might want to look at. But I want to look at Chiron over here. So let's get that pen out. And I want to look at Chiron because Chiron represents a lot of things. But Chiron is a key player in this chart, not only because it shows up on an angle of the chart, but I think it's trying to tell us something, and maybe something about DC. And this would make a lot of sense considering there is a lot going on in the political world. Okay. And I'm not a political, well, I am very political, but I don't want this to be political, but I am going to point out that Chiron is turning points. And even though this hasn't happened yet, or by the time you're seeing it, it might be the day of, I want you to know that this stuff actually starts prior to the time of the date. In other words, astrology works in a cyclical manner. So you will feel something coming into it and then the hit and then leaving it. So let me see if I'll be better at describing. When you're coming into, so we're looking at something, okay? After you cross a certain point and you're coming into where the real whatever it is going to be, I'll put the flower there, you're starting to slowly feel it. And all these degrees leading up to it, okay, especially things like Pluto, but I'm using here Chiron, but no matter, there's all of this energy as you're coming into, I'm talking about the actual moon, the full moon itself, but you feel it and then you get the hit. Then it meanders back again. That's how astrology works. I know it's kind of a poor artwork foundation, but you're coming into it, bam, it hits, but then it meanders away. It's real interesting because, and I read cards too, so I can say this. Sometimes when you read cards, you tell somebody something's going to happen, and one of the things that I'm actually good at is time. And I'll say, in about 2 weeks, okay? And I can see that hit. But realize that part of the reason why things like tarot and astrology work is because the energy has to come into that point also, and then the hit, and then it moves on. So with that said, this full moon is already happening. It's be happening when I speak to you. It's happening today before, and I'm going to be scheduling this. So it's happening. And when Biden, and here we go, right here, Kronos on the midheaven, and it's not really an aspect because it is more than 10 degrees away. Even with windows shut. I don't know what's going on. I live in town and I do apologize, but something's going on. In any event, there's turning points. And one of the things that we all witnessed was the turning point of how different this president was from the former and how it was a huge turning point. Okay. One of the things that he did was talk to somebody who thinks that the rules don't really apply to him. He's unique or special. He doesn't have to follow the rules. That's why he's not in the G7. But you understand how whoa, that's already happened. And it is interesting because DC has it on the midheaven, and the Chiron here is in the 6th house, which is, day to day work, service. And of course, that's actually where the bound, that's like the day to day reality. Don't cross lines, don't hack, the things they talked about, I guess. And being of service to their countries, their respective countries. And I know Biden made it very clear he is about America. So it was a turning point item. So, but what I want to say to you is that it's going to be this way for everyone. Okay. So everyone is going to benefit from that. However, in this 9th house, it's one of the things it is talking about is either, and this is for everybody, but I could use this DC chart and say again that one of the things that they were talking about is things that have happened in the past. That's what Hades represents, but also mistakes, maybe even by past presidents, which we keep hearing about. Terrible things that he did, spying on people and things like that. Chiron, he didn't think the rules applied to him. And now we have a turning point. I hope everybody got that. Look for it in your day-to-day reality. Mistakes made by bosses of the past, whatever it is that has happened or has happened, it is affected by that Chiron at turning point, that 12 degrees of Aries. Okay? And Aries Chiron is, and I have done a whole video on this as well, is teaching us something worth looking at. So that was one thing I wanted to talk about. I did talk about the opposition, which doesn't change, even though it's on an angle on the United States chart. We just might find out that there was, we know there was some manipulation by an authority figure. Okay, so that takes care of this opposition. You can see that red line. Again, to me, that's like way too wide of an orb. You're talking about 12 degrees versus 20. That's 14 degrees. I would not see that as an opposition. However, it depends on the astrologer. I don't see it as one. Obviously, this program does. I think Venus, yes. And we have the dynamic duo here because Venus is also on the angle as is Pluto. So dynamic in that they're both affecting the DC chart directly. Whereas the Hades Cronus that I just spoke about, that's not really. I mean, it has to be within 10 degrees and it's 12 degrees. Okay. Just making sure there wasn't anything else I really wanted to talk about. I think that it's interesting when you look at Lilith, the black moon Lilith, that is, in conjunction with the nodes. And that's kind of why, we're here. And one of the things I'd be concerned about, since it's conjuncting the north node rather than the south node, it has a lot of connection to the south node. But it's almost like I want to say to you, look to people trying to repeat past patterns. Or maybe what they're looking at is finally looking at those past patterns and saying, if I keep going this direction, it's not going to change. That's a possibility. But that was the other thing that really had my eye in this particular configuration. The other thing was, look at the 12s. Oh my goodness. It's just amazing to me. And by the way, these 12s, these two might be sextile, but really, and this one's square, but only Chiron. This is an inconjunct. Okay? Semi-sesquitrad or something, one of those. In any event, when those kinds of aspects happen, though they have weird names, it does generally signify things are happening. So ironically, not so much on the DC chart, but look for that in your lives. Or how do I put this? Maybe some of it comes through news, but I don't think it affects government or the DC chart. Okay. What does is this beautiful trine that I had talked about with Zeus between Mercury and Saturn, where people are very careful about what they say. And it's like, it's easy to listen to those. They make sense. Okay. And that's going to make sense in everybody's chart. Okay. Now I do want to look at, and I'm already on the dial because I had been working. Okay, this is obviously the fuller version. And here we're going to look, I want to really nail on this chart. Like, for example, there's going to be some new beginnings, kind of complicated in Washington. I know they're going to get these infrastructure things through. I just know it. And I think that this is the beginnings of that, and it's a Zeus, and it will be complicated, and it will be done in layers. And that's exactly what they're looking at. So it does work really well. Now, for that, so I do want to tell you that. It also could be related to the voting rights thing, and that might be part of that grand trine we saw. All we have to do is cross our fingers and hope that these are things that they are really hammering out, and that these things will be done, if not this summer, this year. But we are looking at a shorter time frame when we're looking at it. So we only know that these things are being reflected upon right now. And it does look like in a positive way. So I can sort of say that's good, and I can make a little bit of a prediction. Now, what I really want to concentrate as we hit this solar fire program is I want to concentrate on those things that are in the Aries point, because that affects the whole world. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter who you are. If it isn't in your life directly, you're either going to hear about it, read about it, or you're going to live it through somebody else's experience. Okay? And so I'm going to start with Arachne. Okay? Arachne, this little thing here, which is sewing and the internet and layers of intrigue and all the above, just tells us things are complicated. So I'm going to keep it kind of simple with these keywords for now. What's complicated, you say? What's complicated? Well, up here at the midheaven of this DC chart, which I think is so interesting, is the Ophelia Psyche connection. Now, I had talked about this in Vulcan, the planet, and also other asteroid combinations, which is the video I did right before this one. I do encourage you to look at it. I went in depth on this and one other combination that maybe we'll look at yet here. So I'm not going to go through them with the same degree of intention. I'm just going to point out that Psyche, which is emotional wounding, that's how we're going to use it, and Ophelia, overreaction. So we have this, emotional wounding with an overreaction complicates things. Well, that even makes sense in a sentence. If you're emotionally wounded and you're overreacting, because they go together, yeah, it's going to cause a little bit of complication. It's going to cause some big complication. So there is going to be some emotional wounding, even in DC, even in the Senate. I don't understand why, but I'm sure we'll see it. And it's going to complicate things. So always they make things more difficult, don't they? I guess that's why they call it government. But in any event, and it's interesting because it's coming from the ninth. You see, it's on the midheaven, but it's coming in from the ninth house. Okay. Changes. And changes are happening as a result. Now, in this particular chart, note that Chiron is also in aspect to all of this in this chart, because Chiron is in aspect to that descendant. So there is a connection here with people not following the rules, not thinking they have to follow the rules, and with it being a turning point. Because that's what Chiron is. It's turning points. It's a wounded healer, but it's turning points. It's a wounded healer, and we got somebody wounded up here. So there's a lot in this chart that we would be reflecting on, and it's really great stuff that it would be worth our time and reflection. So we have them at the Aries point. We have Arachne at the Aries point. Chiron is not, by the way, at an Aries point. However, in the DC chart, it is big. Okay? Pluto is transformation. It's also things that are out of our control. We already talked about how it was with Venus, which also plays in with all this stuff, by the way, because it is close enough to be an aspect. But in the DC chart, because it's on an angle, it really is. So you see this, this scenario here of the Pluto, this transformational energy, but it's also manipulative. Are people who don't think they have to follow the rules manipulative? Are we being manipulative because we got some wounding going on? I hate to say it, but I do agree that the Republicans do sound like a bunch of sore losers. And I shouldn't gloat on that because it's not nice. But that's about as political as I'll get on this video. But look at it and apply it again into your own life. If you're in this area, but even if you're not, Pluto is still going to be in opposition to Venus. It is still going to be in opposition to Ophelia and Psyche, and it is still going to square Arachne. And for that matter, Zeus, which is that restraint, especially like, as you want to keep energy going through a hole of something that you might be excited about initially, you want to keep up the excitement, that's Zeus. So that's covering it for the DC chart. Okay, let's jump here. The last part of what I want to do is I want to look at this whole thing on a dial, and you can see that I already started. Okay, so I'm going to use not just what's in front of me, but I'm going to use my notes, which are sitting here on my desk, as you can see, I'm sure, from the camera. Okay, so my notes, here we go. All right, so my notes on this are, first of all, here's that Ophelia, Psyche, and of course, Arachne. So I need a pen for all this, that's for sure. All right, and I'm going to try to also, here we go. We're going to try to shoot, I don't know why that would be even in that particular menu, but that's just me. Okay, we have all of this, which we've already talked about, and that's in the Aries point. Okay, see, there's my arrow. So the thing that it's aspecting is this idea that, first of all, memory. Are we remembering things as they are? One of the things that I say about America, and I know that this is a world chart, but I say this about America, we have short memories. Really short memories, or things are forgotten, or we get gaslighted so much that, it gets chaotic. And, that brings me to this. One of the things I hope this means is that this Eos Atropos is that all of this confusion, scattered energy is ending. Okay, that is a huge hope of mine, that it's ending. Because, here, even though this stuff's technically not in the Aries point yet, there is a great anxiety going on in the world. And it's sort of nice that, it was much more, if we're talking the charts, it was much more the last administration than this one. This one, we have issues with his holdouts, but sore losers, Psyche, Ophelia. Okay. But, here, we remember. And I think that's really important. The world remembers. The world remembers at that G7 meeting last year versus the G7 meeting this year. But think of it on a personal level. Do people feel like they're being held against their will, or that they're being abducted in some way? It's really interesting. I was doing this video and I took a break because it didn't work out. And I went downstairs, and on Dr. Oz, Paris Hilton was talking about being abducted. And as a child or a young, and sure enough, Aries point, bing, 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 bing. Today is not the 24th. Today's only the 18th. I think when this video shows, it'll be the 24th. But that just shows you how this chart has already started happening. Okay. Now, think of that in terms of your life and what's going on in your life and the people around you. And I do believe that there are people that are either by virtue of their pride, which is Nobi, they feel really held to something, or maybe because of children. But pride goeth before the fall. So if you feel really, really stuck, you might want to think about that. And that's where that memory comes in and trying to kind of memorize those things. I will tell you that there is help, Circe, even if it's in the final hours, there will be help. So, that is what this chart shows. Now, there's a lot more going on here. And by the way, just for a second, before I jump into my list and go through some of that again, but adding in even more asteroids, look at the fact, see this little character right here. This character, where my cursor is, and I'm going to go switch it to a pen. This character is a midpoint between, and it's only 1 degree, Saturn and Uranus, that anxiety. That's work. So, and where do we often feel like we're being held hostage? Work. Work could be causing a lot of people anxiety. And maybe it's people who have to go back to the office who don't want to. And boy, I don't blame you. Or it could be people who are going back to work and then here we go again, that anxiety. We're still in a pandemic. Though most of us are vaccinated. But I would say anxiety would come if you're not vaccinated. That would be a really good reason to be anxious. And then again, I'd say refer back to my last video where I talked about some asteroids that connected to the illness, and then the illness connected to the Aries point. So that's an interesting configuration. And Poseidon is in there. And it makes me wonder how much the media is playing into this. Okay. Or those wounded, overreactive people play into this. Okay. So the last part of what I want to do, and I keep saying that, but this is really it, is I want to look at all of the asteroids, wrong list, that played into this. And we start with, and this is interesting, money. So money at the top is a big deal. So I guess that doesn't matter what country you're living in, where you're living. Money is part of this Aries point this time, money. Okay. And that makes all of this being held hostage and all of that industrial anxiety and the endings of chaos makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? If money is part of the theme. So then it brings us to, as I said, Eos, but what's down here? Oh boy, is Crone the asteroid. It's not a very good Crone. Crone like as in Kronos. There it is. But this is an asteroid. Means similar. Means, has all the similar properties and meanings, which means bosses and our need to be credible will play into all of this. Authority figures, our need to be credible, how authority figures are, again, in positions of making people not remembering quite again, it just goes back. Things, people remember things from before the pandemic, but it isn't like that anymore. So you can remember back, but we're still in a different time. That's always hard for people to understand. I love when people say, we're going to go back to normal. First of all, A, what's normal? And B, we're not in a flat time. We're in like spiral time. So nothing is ever the same. Next year is next year. So I thought that was really interesting. Things are different. And they surely are. So moving on. So we jump down here and I look, here we go. Yeah, this one goes all the way to Circe, which we did talk of, help in the final hours. So money and help. That's like getting money right when you need it. It just shows up. Okay. Have faith because I think that can happen. Okay. Remember, this is a reflective period. What are you reflecting on? Then we go all the way to what we've been talking about. And I want to point out that these things are, well, I think we're going to get a better asteroid. There's another website that's going to show up here. I could use this one, but it's 4 minutes out. But I'm going to stay anal and I'm not going to put it in simply because that's how astrology works. I know that there's one in there just from going through it, but it makes sense that we would see that. We're also looking at Atropos, as I said down here, and Atropos is running with Delphi. And Delphi is thinking about card readers, psychics, what I do, because I do predictive work for clients. I do solar returns, which really talk about the year ahead. I do tarot readings. I actually do that kind of work. So this is actually talking about Delphi, and it's in the Aries point. And it is talking about people that go out and look for other people that help them with this, psychics and readers and such. But it's also about the Delphi within you. So your ability to read, your ability to intuit, your ability to do astrology, and how that plays into all of this. And remember, Crone is there as well. So it might even be an authority on divination, if you will, because that's what Delphi is. So we move from that into, here we go, ransom, which is over here with all these other abduction, abducted, pride goeth before the fall. Ransom is in the same axis with money, people who do things for the money. Now they're held captive. In some cases, doing things and having to do things against their will or things they don't want to do. All sound very familiar? You might want to look at that. So then, Grieve is up there with Henderson. So we're up here again. Okay? Henderson means that you're antisocial. Well, if you don't have money, you can't go out if money's an issue. But grievances, too many complaints. People have issues. People are complaining about money. I know that people who work in public right now, I really pity them because people can be quite nasty. Psychophilia. Look at that. No wonder some people want to quit their jobs. If you're working with a psychophilia, kind of a nut job, do you see how this is forming a story? And you could apply this story to people who you might know, to things you hear on the news, and to some of us, even our own lives. So I'm kind of running through these lists. And it brings me to, yes, Zeus I've already talked about. Arachne I've already talked about. So I'm over here, okay? Because you keep going around the circle. That's how it works. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how through propaganda, so this point again, through Kronos, let's look about, this is a DC chart, but let's look at the world at large, because surely no matter where you are in the world or the country, you're familiar with the concept of the big lie. Okay. This point and how that's caused confusion, how it's led to an insurgence, It was over a leader who was wounded. Okay. Weasley is there. Weasley is one of my favorite asteroids, especially for reading for other people. I don't really like saying it in my own chart. It means faulty perception. Look at the faulty perceptions that are coming out of some of the medias. Faulty perceptions. To Poseidon literally on Poseidon on the Aries point. So we might even be hearing more in the news about how certain media groups affected certain people to follow a certain leader. It's just too much. Okay, so, but think about Weasley in your own life, because honestly, when I'm reading for people privately, I really do like to look at Weasley, because it is amazing what faulty perceptions can do to us. So we move on, and I did talk about Helena. She's over here, and that's the abductive concept. As I move down my list, oh, news up here. So I'm back up here again. Hermes. We're going to have news about money. We're going to have news about getting help. We're going to have news about authority figures. We're going to have news about working environments. We're going to have news about faulty perceptions and people, maybe even, I hate to say that, going to jail. Subpoenas, I guess that would be. Okay? So, but again, that could be the news, but look what's going on in your own life. The other thing about here is Merlin. Merlin is also on the Aries point, and that's actualizing something. That is making something coming into being. Remember, we talked about the media, faulty perception, a Chronos. Here we got this Merlin actualizing something. Now, to those of us who need money, actualizing money or getting money when you really need it, as I already stressed, is definitely going to happen. But Merlin is a magician. It not only can actualize things, it can manipulate them. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. We all know who Merlin is. And though he may have been a good sorcerer, he was still manipulative. And he used his power to manipulate others. So it's like actualizing something. So be careful that we're not doing that, but you might be witnessing it. So as we move on, we have, keep going. I know there's not a lot at this point until we get, and here it is. Okay. Mezzanine, which I already spoke about, is just within 30 minutes. We talked about that, but I also want to point out that we have faulty perceptions, that we have been manipulated. We've been manipulated through press, and we need to, we have to be able to sort all this out ourselves. Remember, it's a full moon. It's a reflective period. The other thing I can talk about very, very briefly, just before I end this, if you look at the other video that I did, Vulcan, the planet, and also other asteroid combinations, I talked really a lot about lacrimosa and hubris. Hubris is fate, or like you're tempted by the fates, but it's really expectations versus limitations. And then lacrimosa is like an unpleasant outlook on something. It's also sadness. Now, the beauty is they are outside of this by about 1.5 degrees, but I did want to mention them because they're only outside of that point, and that some people could maybe still see some of this within their own sphere. Okay. But if you want to know more about that, again, check the video that I did before this one. So let me come back. So we're back. And I stayed within my time again, so thank goodness. So I just wanted to reiterate that I'm trying to really heavily focus on these asteroids, because I think that's the one thing that I can really bring to this channel, to this, even to the YouTube format, is a lot of work with asteroids, and if anything, to really encourage people to use them. So with that said, I work with a man by the name of Mark Pottinger, who does like kind of a standalone program with asteroids. But for those of you who are really interested, there is a thing called the Swiss Ephemeris. and you could get whatever you need. I believe you kind of put a date in. And the same thing with the something called astrodienst.com. Okay. And I'm not even really sure how to spell it, but I think that if you put it in there, and I think it is just how it sounds, that you put it, that you were looking for that. There are programs out there where all you have to do, and you might have to ask for English, but because this is world stuff, and I believe that could be German or Dutch, German, I believe. But what I would say is then you could put your dates in and you could get your birth date. And if you wanted to look at a specific time period, you could get a list of whatever asteroids you want to look up. Okay, please bear in mind that I have a list of 22,182, something like that, asteroids. Okay, that's not an exaggeration. Those are just the named asteroids. I don't really use them all, but I do use a lot, like in the thousands. Now, I have them on separate lists because when I do medical, that's a whole other list of asteroids. I try to separate them to, for what I'm doing here, I try to use the asteroids that I would use a lot in readings, unless I'm doing medical readings, because there are asteroids that just apply to everyday life, like truth and lies, and things that help us with our everyday lives. And then there are asteroids that really are very applicable to health. I use general health in the regular ones, but like Neptune is, and Hygeia, and so there's a few. Hesfesta, no, I'm sorry, can't think of it offhand. I could tell you in a second. Hippocrates, that's what it is. Polaris. Those are a couple that we use. But when you're working with asteroids, it becomes very overwhelming. So what I suggest people do is do what I'm doing on the videos, which is I pick a few, I really reiterate them, try to learn a lot about them and incorporate them before moving on to try new ones. But I would love to hear from you what your thoughts are on some of these and if you're using them or not. That would be really cool. And I hope that people are considering it. In any event, as always, I want to say be safe, be well, and my usual. Until we meet again, I wish you only happy reading.